Well, that's true. You don't want to overload your system with anything, food or thoughts, before sleep. I do think that sleep and light are, and I think of it as almost one and the same, are the foundational elements of all our health.
Spartans, welcome to Spartan Up Podcast. We are your accountability, rip you off the couch, kick you in the partners. I'm Joe De Sena, CEO and founder of Spartan. I've got Sefra,
blessing,
the seed huntress to my right. We don't have Dr. Johnny. We don't have Colonel Nye because they are on lockdown in an undisclosed location for the pandemic. Let me tell you about this guy, Andrew Huberman, I interviewed today. You are going to love this guy. I mean, if you're having trouble sleeping, if you're having trouble organizing your life around a schedule, if you need stress relief, this guy gave me tips. Sefra, you're going to be, it's unbelievable.
I know, it's unbelievable. And he's saying stuff we haven't heard before.
And I've been to a lot of biohacking conferences. I'm good friends, as you know, with Tim Ferriss, who was the original biohacker, right? Dave Asprey. I'm telling you, this guy is unbelievable. I might move to California just to go hang out with him.
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Honey Stinger, made with organic honey and delicious ingredients. Use the code HSSpartan2020 at honeystinger.com to save 30% off.
Here we are for Spartan Up Podcast. Andrew Huberman, Stanford professor of neuroscience. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
And are you at Stanford now?
I'm about an hour away from my laboratory, and I've been going in actually during this time. We've kept experiments going, although with safety measures in place.
And so I want to talk about all kinds of fun stuff with the brain. Obviously Spartan, modern Spartan, not ancient Sparta. But modern Spartan and our company, we kind of just push through, right? We got this gritty mindset and we just get after it and we sweat a lot, but we could use a little more discussion about the brain. I just actually was napping. I'm embarrassed to say, but since you're with me here, I was napping. And what are your thoughts on napping? Does that help?
Well, first of all, let's remove the embarrassment by putting some neuroscience on it. I would say you were learning, you were getting better. And here's why. There is now ample evidence, experimental evidence in animal models and in humans that neuroplasticity, this ability of the brain to change in response to experience, so it could be physical skill learning or mental skill learning, that's a two-part process. Everything in biology is a process, not an event. And it's a two-part process. And the first part of that process is there's a trigger, meaning there's something that stimulates changes in those neurons. And just merely going through your day isn't going to trigger neuroplasticity. The idea that everything we do in experience changes our brain, that's just false. That's true when you're a child. It's especially true when you're a child. But after about age 25, just moving through your day is largely reflexive behavior. And we don't change much in response to that. However, if in the last 48 to 72 hours, you did anything that was intentionally geared toward changing your brain, maybe it was reading, maybe it was important conversation with your partner or a friend, or you did some skill learning or some effort-based action, exercise. You marked particular synapses in your brain for change, for neuroplasticity, but they don't have to change. The only way that they're going to change is during periods of rest. And there are 3 periods of rest that are important for neuroplasticity. The first is deep sleep, in particular slow wave sleep. Many people think it's REM sleep, but it's mostly slow wave sleep when those changes actually occur. The other is brief naps, which the experimental data, so a recent paper published in Cell Reports, shows that naps of about 20 minutes where you don't go into REM, so non-REM shallow sleep, as well as a third type of rest, which is when you just go into what I call deliberate decompression. When you're just let your mind go. You're not looking at your phone, you're not scrolling Instagram, you might be taking a walk, you might be even in conversation, but you let go of the attentional mechanisms of the brain. Those are the 3 periods of time in which we know that the brain rewires and gets better. And this is why people can practice a tennis serve over and over and over, and then take some time away from it, and 2 days later they come back and they nail it. So I would say you were napping, but there's no embarrassment required. You were absolutely getting better at whatever it is that you were trying to get better at.
I was getting smarter. Explain slow wave sleep.
Yeah, slow wave sleep is just one of the phases of sleep that we use to distinguish from rapid eye movement or REM sleep, REM sleep. During REM sleep, the eyes, as the name suggests, move around quite a lot. Some people sleep with their eyelids slightly open. You might see this. It looks kind of bizarre when you see them doing it. Slow wave sleep is sort of larger amplitude, delta wave type sleep. It's a time of deep recovery, both of neural tissue and of body tissue. Remember, the nervous system includes the brain, spinal cord, and connections to and from the body. And so the nervous system actually directs the adaptations and changes that we see in things like physical exercise and learning of all kinds. In slow wave sleep, there are a number of important things that happen. One of the most important that we've learned about in recent years is a more rapid perfusion of cerebral spinal fluid through the brain. And it acts as kind of a washout of some of the neurochemical debris that accumulates throughout the day just by ordinary living. And that neurochemical washout actually turns out to be important for offsetting age-related memory decline, aka dementia, as well as for repairing bodily tissues. One of the things that is often overlooked is that the nervous system instructs the immune system and wound healing, not the other way around. And so tissues like the thymus and other tissues that make important immune cells and the blood vessels and the vasculature that deliver all that, that's instructed by the nervous system, by neurons. And a lot of that is happening during slow wave sleep. We're all told to sleep when we're sick or get more rest or when we're injured. And so we should all be asking, well, why? Why is that important? Why can't I just be awake and relaxed or something? It actually is in these deeper states of sleep that a lot of that wound healing and repair and just general adaptation of the nervous system is occurring.
It's like going to a car wash for your brain.
It is. It is. And we've all heard a lot in recent years about all the terrible things that are going to happen if we don't get enough sleep. We're going to get dementia. We're going to, break down all these terrible things. One of the things that my lab has been focused on, and in my public education efforts, what I've been focused on is trying to give some tools as to how people can sleep better, because I think we've heard enough about sleep being important. And now it's sort of like, okay, but how do I get better at sleeping? We've heard so much about it, in fact, that people are starting to get a kind of sleep-related anxiety, which is its own form of insomnia. So one thing that we're really focused on in my lab is how some of the things like deep relaxation can give the brain access to states that even mimic sleep and give you the capacity to fall asleep and stay asleep better.
Yeah, so that was my next question about, like, how do we hack slow wave sleep? Because it sounds like all of us need a little more of that. So is there a way to hack that?
Yeah. So there are really three approaches that I recommend to anybody trying to adjust anything in terms of their nervous system, whether or not sleep or performance of any kind. And that's always going to be to look to behavioral changes first. Then you have to look to kind of diet. And then I would say third to supplementation. And then fourth, if there's an important need, then you could look to, sort of prescription drugs, of course, working with the folks who write prescriptions or physicians, of which I am not. So the behavioral steps that can really enhance depth and quality of sleep. It's going to sound so simple, but I'm guessing that most people are not doing this. There is abundant scientific literature in humans that getting exposure to bright light first thing in the morning, doesn't have to be sunrise, but usually before about 9 a.m. And that bright light has to arrive to the eyes. Doing that for about 2 to 10 minutes each day is setting up two very important features of your body that will prepare you for better sleep. The first thing is it times your morning cortisol pulse. We always hear about cortisol is bad, but a morning cortisol pulse is good. It's going to prime you for energy and activity during the day. It's also going to set a timer, literally a biological timer, on the release of this pro-sleepy hormone called melatonin, which is secreted from our pineal, to come on about 16 hours later. So if you wake up and you're looking at your phone, or you're just using artificial lights in your home, you are not getting sufficient what's called photon capture, which is just light energy, to the eyes to then signal to the brain, to then signal to the rest of the body about when you need to be asleep. So get morning sunlight. And even if you're in New England in the depths of winter and there's cloud cover, there's still a lot of photons coming through. I have this dorky app on my phone. I have nothing to do with the app, but no formal relationship. I think it's called Lux or Light Meter, I think it's called. And I'll go measure the brightness. There's like 50,000 lux coming through on a dark, cloudy day. And then you look at the lamp in your kitchen and it's like 400 lux. It's nothing. And so you really need to get some photons early in the day. You don't need it to be direct, beaming your eyes with light, but ideally you take your sunglasses off, go outside for a little bit. If you want to do something else or have a conversation, that's fine, but get that morning sunlight. The other thing that's really important for getting into these better.
Let me stop you for a second. Get that morning sunlight. Like, I wake up at 4:20 in the morning. If I don't get that sunlight, hypothetically, until 8 a.m., that hasn't worked. And because my 16-hour clock starts then, that's what you're saying?
Yeah, you sound like a morning person. It's okay to use artificial lights if you want to be awake at that time. And then when the sun does come out, go outside and get some natural light. There's nothing quite like the quality of light that comes from sunlight, because the neurons in the eye that respond to this, their name is melanopsin ganglion cells, et cetera. That name doesn't matter, but they really pay closest attention, not to blue light. Everyone thinks it's blue light. It's not blue light. It's what I call the blue light myth. It's actually the contrast between yellows getting brighter and blues getting darker, is what the research supports. So as the sun comes out, and even if there's cloud cover, the yellow wavelengths are getting brighter and the blue wavelengths are getting darker. And so if you're an early riser, that's fine. Turn on some bright lights, move about as you must, but get that bright sunlight early in the day. Then in addition to that, you really want to avoid bright lights of all colors, not just blue, from the hours of about 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. I don't want to go too deep into the study, but there was a beautiful study done by my friend Samar Hattar, who's head of the chronobiology unit at the National Institutes of Health, and a guy named David Burson at Brown University, not far from you, showing that bright light exposure in the middle of the night, not once, but on a regular basis, does two very bad things. First of all, it suppresses the release of this feel-good chemical dopamine and can lead to pro-depressive effects and deficits in learning and memory. That was very clearly shown. And in addition to that, a separate paper showed that the brain structure that this acts on is in communication through a direct connection, a neural connection, wires literally, to the pancreas, and it can start disrupting blood sugar regulation. So this doesn't mean that you can't look at your phone for a moment in the middle of the night or a tablet, but try and keep the screen dim. If you wake up and you go to the bathroom, keep the lights dim. And even better, keep the lights low in your physical environment. The cells that wake up your body, that are in your retina, that signal the wake up signal to your rest of your brain and body, they live in the bottom half of your eye and they view the upper visual field. They were designed to view the sun. So if you keep lights at kind of desk level or floor level, you're way better off than if you have overhead lights.
I'm gonna optimize your story there, your facts to fit my life. My wife likes to keep some lights on, and as soon as I get any light anywhere, I'm like a vampire. I wake up, I can't go back to bed. I can't get any light. And so I'm gonna say I just spoke to this genius out of Stanford, and he said we have to be pitch black in the middle of the night. So you literally might have just positively changed our life.
Well, I'm happy that I can be a positive effect. I'm definitely not a genius. This is work that was done collectively by the field of neuroscience. I'm just the messenger, but it is very important. We're seeing a lot of mental health issues, performance issues. I mean, we're talking about the brain to pancreas connection, blood sugar. We're talking about testosterone and estrogen levels. We're talking about cortisol levels being dysregulated. A lot of bad things happen from getting too much light in the middle of the night on a regular basis. Now, for shift workers and people that are traveling and jet lag, that's a separate discussion. We'd probably need about a half hour to kind of hack into each one of their situations. But because there's a way to offset that, but I can make it short and just say the best way to offset nighttime light exposure is two ways. One is to get that morning light that we talked about before. The other is there's a beautiful study. I wish my lab had done this, but we didn't. Beautiful study showing that evening or late afternoon sunlight helps offset some of the negative effects of light in the middle of the night. And the way it does that is your brain and body want to anchor to as many regularities as they can. We always hear about homeostasis. The body wants homeostasis. Well, life isn't homeostatic. Things are happening all the time. You wake up in the middle of the night, a kid cries, your partner snores, whatever. You turn on a light. But by getting that morning sunlight and that evening light, you're giving every cell in your body the information it needs about timing. It can anchor to something. And we love to be able to do this with food because, eating schedules are also a strong determinant of biological cycles. and so are when you exercise. But, it's very hard sometimes to get your meals on an exact regimen. I mean, unless you're really like neurotic, 6 meal a day type person, or even 4 meal a day, it's very hard. And so you can create the regularity with the sunlight. Sunlight is the strongest, what we call Zeitgeber, which is German for timekeeper, because the folks that discovered this were German. So the strongest Zeitgeber is light. All the other stuff is important, but it pales in comparison, no pun intended, to the fact that light is the dominant way that all your biological systems know how to behave properly.
Yeah, no, that's the story I've been telling. Like, 'cause I'm dying for my family to wake up super early and go to bed early, right? That's the battle a lot of people have with their family. And the argument I've been making, which was not based on any science, simply logic, for all these years we've been on the planet, we probably woke up when the sun came up, and we probably went to bed when the sun went down. It just made sense to me. I don't know. We didn't have light bulbs.
Well, you're absolutely right in this argument. So the Earth spins once every 24 hours. That's a non-negotiable fact of the galaxy, okay? And every cell in our body has a clock that runs on a 24-hour schedule. It's a little off from 24 hours. Sometimes people have a schedule that runs a little longer, sometimes a little shorter, and that will make them night owls or morning people. If you really want to become a morning person, it's very straightforward. You have to force exercise first thing in the morning. You have to get light in your eyes first thing in the morning. And you have to, ideally, you start going to sleep a little bit earlier, but for some people that's hard to do. Now, I mentioned behavioral, dietary, and then supplementation. Now, my lab doesn't work on the dietary and supplementation part, so I want to highlight the fact that what I'm about to describe now, it can be and generally is very helpful to a lot of people, but the behavioral stuff is the most important. So a lot of people here nowadays, you're not supposed to eat past 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. or too close to bedtime. But then we also hear that there's this calming reflex, the parasympathetic nervous system. It's sometimes called the rest and digest. Well, that's that advice is contradictory. So what is it? Well, it turns out that actually eating carbohydrate-rich foods, or things like turkey and white meats, actually promote the release of amino acids like tryptophan, which make us sleepy. So does that mean you should stuff yourself with carbohydrates right before bed? No, but many people, not all, find that shifting their complex carbohydrate intake to periods of time in which, assuming they just didn't have intense exercise, which is a separate issue, closer to sleep actually helps them sleep more deeply. So a lot of people are on these low carb diets, which I don't necessarily have a problem with, are doing it exactly backwards. You want to be alert, you reduce your number of carbohydrates to promote the things like dopamine and acetylcholine, and we can talk about those. If you want to be sleepy and you want to sleep deeply, you eat foods that promote promote tryptophan release and serotonin production and GABA production. So a lot of people are doing it kind of backwards, and they're doing it for body composition reasons, but they have it kind of inverted. And so in general, it's best to, if you're going to follow a kind of moderate to carbohydrate regimen, to push those towards times when you want to be relaxed, or you just had very intense glycogen depleting exercise. Now, the third category is supplementation. I don't sell supplements. It's not my thing. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a professor, so I profess things. I don't prescribe them. So you have to check with your doctor. But there are two supplements in particular that I think many people benefit from. One is L-theanine, Theanine. 100 to 200 milligrams of L-theanine promotes the release of GABA, which helps people turn off their kind of thinking, their forebrain ruminating, and helps them fall asleep. And the other is magnesium threonate. And the form of magnesium turns out to be important here, which is Threonate. Those two in combination for a lot of people can act as a soporific, help them get to sleep. And for most people will be safe, although you should definitely check with your doctor. I do not recommend taking melatonin. Melatonin should come from your pineal naturally. You do not want to supplement melatonin, in my opinion. And here's why. Melatonin's primary role is to suppress puberty during development. It's chronically high in kids. It's one of the reasons they're sleeping all the time too. So, people are taking melatonin, and it could potentially, there are great reviews and articles about this, could potentially have some pretty negative effects on the testosterone and estrogen axis. And so I think people overemphasize melatonin and Ambien and things like that, and they underemphasize light and diet and the structure and timing of their diet, and some of the safer supplements, in my opinion, that can really help promote depth of sleep, in particular slow wave sleep.
You know, Doc, my mom was into yoga, meditation, health food, cold showers, proper food combining, the whole discussion here in the 1970s. I don't know how that happened. Way before it was cool. She was very bohemian and open-minded, I guess. And so I have an open mind to this, so much so that I think, there are people that pay attention in their automobile to the dashboard and the little lights that come on, change your oil, focus on this or that. And then there are people that don't pay attention. I pay attention to every little signal. And for me, evidence I have based on that way of thinking is when I eat less and I eat clean, so less complex carbs or manufactured carbohydrates and so forth, don't eat 4 hours before bed, shorter eating window, I sleep as if I'd been hit by a sledgehammer. I mean, I'm out. I don't wake up. And then when I wake up, it's like, oh my God, like I missed that whole, I don't even know what just happened in the last 8 or 6 hours, whatever
That's great.
it was. But I don't know if that's for most, do you find that for most people or no?
For me, I can't go to sleep hungry. So, and this may boil down to blood sugar regulation. I mean, there's this idea that certain foods like red meats and nuts, because they have more tyrosine, they promote things like acetylcholine and dopamine. They're going to make you more alert. But look, if you eat 2 ribeye steaks, or if I know for myself, I don't need a double-blind placebo-controlled study that I know that if I eat 2 ribeye steaks, I'm going to pass out on the couch. I don't care what time of day it is, right? Unless I'm very, very hungry and protein deprived, in which case I'll probably go for a third. But in general, I think you're right. I think there's some variation here, and I think people need to play with it. People need to see if they're doing intermittent fasting, when does that feeding window serve their sleep best? I do think that sleep and light are, and I think it's almost one and the same, are the foundational elements of all our health and repair. I should mention one thing, which is that there's actually work that was done not far from you at Harvard Medical School. Chuck Zeiser's lab showed that people who are pattern blind, they can't see, they can still, what we call entrain these circadian rhythms. They still benefit from getting this light exposure to the eyes, assuming they still have eyes and they weren't, a burn victim where the eyes actually are gone. These cells that perform this role are still intact. Even blind people benefit from getting onto a regular light schedule. Feeding schedules are very important, but it's very nuanced. And these days, I'm not a nutritionist. There's so much opinion out there about what diet to follow. I think people really need to be a bit of a scientist for themselves and learn what works best. For me, that's low carb all day, unless I just had very intense exercise, in which case I glycogen, I try and replenish my glycogen. And then at night, I like to eat my carbohydrates and less protein, and I sleep like a baby. But I generally cut off food by about 2 hours before I go to sleep. Not neurotically, I just happen to lose my appetite late at night.
I will tell you that in what I described, it's hard to go to bed when you haven't eaten in the last 3 or 4 hours, or you're eating it's hard to fall asleep. But once you do, for me,
yeah,
it's deep.
There is this idea that fasted states promote growth hormone release, and that when you're fasted and you're sleeping, deep sleep, slow wave sleep is actually when you're going to get the most release of growth hormone from the pituitary. And growth hormone, of course, has these tremendous reparative qualities to it. Fat burning, all these the youthfulness things that everybody is seeking. So I think it's great if you can fall asleep not having eaten in the last 4 hours. That's great. Some people can't, but I don't think people should be stuffing themselves right before bed.
Yeah, because like I was actually listening to you when you said you'd eat 2 ribeyes and go to bed. Like maybe this is unique to me, but the theory was from 1972 from Mom that if your stomach's digesting and that machine is running, you're not getting a good sleep. And it just made sense. I don't know.
Well, that's true. I mean, you don't want to overload your system with anything, food or thoughts, before sleep. I mean, we all know what it's like to wake up from kind of a restless night's sleep. And sometimes it feels like it's because of our dreams. That's actually reminds me of one behavioral tool that I didn't mention, which is very powerful. So forgive me for not mentioning this earlier. My lab actually is studying this. So there's something called yoga nidra, which means yoga sleep. It involves no movement. You just lie down and you listen to a script. I can pass some along as links after this. They're available all over YouTube. I use either a 10-minute one or a 30-minute one. And my lab has been studying a kind of stripped down version of it that's really just focused on the respiration patterns, the breathing patterns. A lot of people find this useful both for accessing deep relaxation outside of sleep and for getting better at falling asleep. Because for many people, turning their thoughts off is very challenging. And here's one thing that we know just from life experience: it's very hard to control the mind with the mind. I can't just tell myself to stop thinking about something or turn off my thoughts. It never works. So what this process does is it brings your attention to elements of your body, kind of moves your attention out away from your body and back to your body. There's some breathing done as well. Many people find that it helps them fall asleep very quickly. And my lab has found that it brings the brain and body into states that mimic sleep. I don't subscribe to the idea that we can't recover sleep that's lost. This whole notion that you can't recover your sleep debt, I fundamentally disagree. What we're really talking about is restoring a couple things like adenosine and certain autonomic tone in the nervous system for the aficionados, trying to restore that back to a baseline. And that, of course, can be done best in sleep, but there are other things like these yoga nidra scripts, which are great because unlike meditation, you don't have to do any work. You just listen, you just passively listen. And that will allow you to drop into states that are very deeply restorative and relaxing. So that's another behavioral tool, completely cost-free. I do them before I give lectures. Like sometimes I'll go and up in my hotel room if I'm traveling or something, or even I've even gone just behind the podium before and hidden in the back and put in my headphones and done these. I come out of this feeling like I slept 8 hours. And that's anecdotal, but there's scientific data to support this as well.
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Honey Stinger. Honey Stinger is made with organic honey and delicious ingredients. Honey Stinger's waffles, energy chews, gels, and bars give you the fuel you need to push harder, go further, do all the things that we do as Spartans. For training and racing, you need convenient nutrition that tastes great and works. Honey Stinger is Spartan's official on-course nutrition. It's made with real honey. Honey Stinger started with a simple plan: wholesome ingredients, great taste, and, of course, honey. Why does Honey Stinger use honey? Using an ingredient engineered by nature, not in a laboratory, it has its benefits. In fact, the less you mess with Mother Nature, the better. That's why they're committed to the True Source Honey Pledge. And they've got a special code just for our audience. You can save 30% with the code HSSpartan2020. That's HSSpartan2020 at honeystinger.com to save 30% off, just for our Spartan Up podcast listeners.
It's really funny that you brought that up because I meet a lot of people thanks to Spartan, all kinds of biohackers, this thing, that thing, and they always ask me, do you meditate? And again, from Mom, I meditate before I go to bed. I don't meditate during the day or in the morning because my theory has always been, why would I want to slow down before I get going? I want to slow down before I go to bed. And I only have to meditate for like maybe 90 seconds, 100 seconds before I'm out. I just shut my mind down. I focus just on the light, something my mom taught me. And it's hard to do because your mind is still racing a little bit, but then boom, I'm out.
That's great. Well, clearly you've mastered the toggling back and forth between what we call sympathetic states, which are the ones that are more elevated and alert, and the parasympathetic states. And I realize these names, sympathetic, parasympathetic, are terrible. Scientists are great at figuring things out. They're terrible at naming things. They name it like everything's like an oxymoron and an acronym. It's dreadful. But it sounds like you're very good at shifting between those states. We hear a lot these days about heart rate variability. Your audience is very fitness minded, so I'm sure they're going to be familiar with that. What I'm really talking about here is autonomic and heart rate variability on the time scale of 24 hours. What you've clearly gotten very good at is being ramped up and ready to go, focus all day, and then dropping into that low activation state at night. And I think people need practice doing this on long time scales, like 24 hours. They need practice doing this on shorter time scales. In ancient times, we did it on seasonal time scales. But nowadays, we don't really go into kind of a winter hibernation type mode. We've got strawberries in December, and we're, hitting long runs all, in the depths of winter, or at least you guys are. So I think people need to think about toggling back and forth their nervous system. We're neither supposed to be calm all the time nor alert all the time. The key is control. The key is to be able to control the tightness of the hinge. I was thinking of it kind of like a seesaw. And it's not about learning to keep the seesaw in the middle. Actually, there are times when you really want to gas it, but then there are times when you want to be able to relax. And your ability, if that hinge is too tight, it's going to get locked in one place or the other. If the hinge is too loose, you're going to be going back and forth all the time. The key is to kind of control that hinge. And that's where the mind and that's where these behavioral practices really comes into play.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. And you train a bunch of Navy SEALs, you teach Navy SEALs and special forces.
Okay. Yeah. So to be really clear, cause that's a sensitive community. So I do work with Canadian Special Forces. I have a number of friends. With guys that are still active duty, a number of different groups there have done that and continue to do that. I do some work with that's getting kicked off now with naval special warfare. I have 3 close friends who are all in the teams, spend anywhere from 9 to 20 years in the teams. I'm doing some work with technology development. There's a lot of brain-machine interface stuff that's emerging now in neuroscience with that community. So, in those communities, what you find is all those communities, Canadian and US, the selection process, like AKA buds, is really, in my mind, is a filter for who can control their nervous system best at the level of this kind of hinge-like mechanism that I described before. Now, they wouldn't describe it that way. They'd say, yeah, I figured it out. I figured out how to just get to the next meal. I figured out they can't, I thought in a gritty way, or I thought about, purpose, or everyone works it out slightly differently, but everyone's working it out in a dynamic relationship to what's being forced upon them, because the conditions are non-negotiable. They're thrown into those conditions. They have to figure it out internally. And that's why I think those guys are so good at exporting that mindset to the battlefield and to their training and to life. It's kind of interesting that none of them are actually selected purely for physical ability. They're selected, of course, for some basic physical ability, but really for this mental ability to dynamically adjust their internal state depending on the demands of the external world. And that's that's that narrow corridor that everybody is seeking. And that's why I think, in addition to them doing, very important work for national security, and we're grateful for that, I think that's one of the reasons why I've been so intrigued by that community, is that they've tapped into these mechanisms through a kind of subconscious genius. They didn't know they were doing it, but they do it.
Yeah, no, I've had the fortune of working with the military, and I agree with you. It's a special breed, a special bunch. I happen to be, I'll be a little clandestine. I happen to be at a location when, right after Osama bin Laden, right when some folks were coming back, and everybody was pretty calm. There was no and so what is that? What is that from? That. I guess that's what you're saying, that seesaw, right? That ability to just all right, let's go get a taco.
They're a unique breed. And you see that mindset in other communities too. The community that I see that a lot in is neurosurgeons. So I have a very close friend from childhood who's a neurosurgeon at UC San Francisco, phenomenal scientist. He has that thing too, whatever that is, but we can speculate a little bit about what that is. And we can maybe even put some actionable items on it for the everyday person. So, the ability to toggle back and forth between high activation, high focus states and calm is really at the heart of any long duration effort, any challenging thing, any kind of working through something, whether it's physical or mental or both. So if we just take a step back for a second, what the brain really wants to do is pass stuff off to be reflexive, so it doesn't have to work too hard. Doesn't have to use that forebrain. It really wants to make breathing and walking and running, and wants to make most things reflexive. But it reserves a certain amount of energy, literally, glucose metabolizing energy, for one set of analyses, which I refer to as duration, path, and outcome. The brain wants to figure out, in challenging circumstances, how long is this going to last? What course is it going to take, or what course should I take? And what's the outcome going to be? And the more of those things we can control or have certainty about, the better we're going to feel and the less stressed we're going to feel. The fewer, then the more stress we're going to feel. It's kind of like this COVID-19 thing that we happen to be recording this in the time of this. It's a lot of uncertainty. And so duration, path, and outcome are complicated there. So what ends up happening is it's a phenomenon I refer to as neural burn rate. So if I have to concentrate on something and figure it out, that's work. And so what you find is there's a certain set of neurochemicals, mainly norepinephrine and adrenaline, which are actually the same thing chemically, one's in the body, one's in the brain, that allow us to be in effort and allow us to have that sense of urgency and that sense of alertness. However, there's a study that was published last year that shows if norepinephrine goes too high, it triggers a quitting reflex. It actually shuts down motor commands from the brain to the body, voluntary motor commands. So there has to be something else. And the other thing, that other something else, is dopamine, a neurochemical that we're all familiar with for its role in reward and addiction and all this stuff. But what's really not understood well by the general public, but is well appreciated in the culture of neuroscience, the community of neuroscience, is that dopamine isn't just released when you reach rewards. It's released en route to rewards. It's released anytime you think you hit a milestone that is on the right path to where you want to go. And what it does is dopamine acts to suppress that level of norepinephrine. It pushes it back down and makes something that was seeming exceedingly hard seem possible again. Now, you've experienced this, and I've experienced this, when you're really in it, and maybe you have a thought, or maybe somebody cracks a joke, and you're like, you laugh, and all of a sudden you feel replenished. Or maybe you imagine some higher purpose of why you're doing what you're doing, and you feel replenished. Now, it's instantaneous, so it couldn't have been hormonal. It couldn't have been, hormones act on the schedule of hours to days to weeks, sometimes even months. It had to have been neurochemical, and that neurochemical is dopamine. And so when you think about the special operations community, yes, they're intensely focused. They have a lot of grit. But look, everyone that shows up to the screening process looks the part, has a ton of motivation and a ton of grit. They'll all tell you they would sooner die than quit. And then most of them quit. So something shifted internally that didn't allow them to persist. And I believe that people who, not just special forces folks, but also people who navigate cancer treatment, long duration effort of any kind, Spartan races, they learn to tap into these effort mechanisms, norepinephrine, reward mechanisms. Notice they're all internally rewarded, right? It's not about the trophy. It's about some internal thought or experience. So they can then replenish themselves, and they learn how to toggle between effort and those calm states. They don't burn out extra energy when they don't need to. So when they're walking to grab some water, they might tune out their thinking and even their gaze, their visual gaze, and relax. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe 5 seconds, but they either intuitively know or consciously know that they're going to be able to then lean back into effort 10 more seconds than had they not done that, right? So they're toggling all the time. So when you say these guys come back from a really serious op and everybody's really calm, I think it's just built into their system to learn how to flip that switch. And a lot of getting through long duration, uncertain effort of any kind is about learning how to toggle those switches. We may do it consciously, we may do it subconsciously, but the beauty of it is we now know that people are tapping into dopamine to push back on norepinephrine. They're feeling tired, so maybe they'll ramp up that norepinephrine, but then they'll overcompensate with a 20-minute nap, or when they walk to the from their car to their next meeting, if this is in the business environment or school environment, for instance, instead of looking at their phone, which I do all the time, and holding a little mini meeting between the meetings, they actually are just kind of like, oh, interesting. I'm just going to get a little light in my eyes or listen to a song or something. So they're doing this, what we now know to be heart rate variability, but they're toggling their nervous system burn rate. And in doing that, they gain a tremendous advantage had they just simply said, I'm going to be gritty. I'm going to drill through. We look on Instagram, we see on Twitter and on the internet, and it's all about grit, resilience, growth mindset. But what's lost in those words, which are beautiful concepts, really, but what's lost in that is mechanistically how, right? I mean, how?
Oh,
and I think that
you just put the science behind something I've understood for a long time, but I didn't, which is if I was on, let's say, a 300-mile run, it's overwhelming. It's too much, right? But if I could just make it to that telephone pole, and I get to that telephone pole and I pat myself on the back, I probably gave myself a little dopamine release.
100%. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But you got to reward yourself with every bite.
Well, that second sentence, I'm so glad you said that, because I always hear, journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Eat the elephant one bite at a time. But it's that additional statement, right? That, you have to reward, and those rewards are internal. And we badly misunderstand internal rewards. People think, oh, internal rewards are just me telling myself I'm doing well. It's not positive self-talk. It's about linking the positive self-talk to a specific thing that you actually did accomplish, that is in the direction of your ultimate goal. It's not about focusing on the ultimate goal. We all talk about keep the end in mind. Keeping the end in mind is just a compass. It's just a compass reading of where you eventually need to get to. But you actually, Alex Honnold's a really salient example, or any other climber, right? It doesn't have to be free solo climbing. He's not thinking about climbing up on top of that rock at every step. In fact, if he did, it could potentially be deadly. It's about moving the horizon in. Actually, a good friend from SEAL team community, he's out now, my friend Pat Dossett, he says, it's all about learning how to move the horizon. And constantly dynamically adjusting the horizon.
Yeah, no, we're in complete agreement. I love that. The other thing, I don't know if it's the same thing, is when I'm in a really tough spot, I immediately have some gratitude and say, it could be worse. And I go to a place where it is much worse than where I am. And I'm like, this is fine now.
So gratitude's an interesting one. The phrase I like to put around gratitude is people often mistake gratitude for complacency. And from a neurochemical standpoint, nothing could be further from the truth. Gratitude and the ability to self-generate rewards with just what you imagine you have, or what you actually do have, creates a neurochemical milieu in the body and brain that allows you then to lean back into effort. It's restorative. And so gratitude isn't about navel gazing, right? It's really about restoring the neurochemicals that allow you to be outwardly focused again. In brief, dopamine is really the molecule of reward and effort and external view, your view of things that are beyond the reach of your hands. It's the goal line, it's the finish line, it's the next milestone, it's the next whatever. Serotonin and the reward systems of like serotonin and the healthy opioid system, the one that you make yourself, the endogenous opioid system, are really about rewards for the things you have, holding your kids, appreciation of a meal, appreciation of a breath for that matter. Those neurochemical systems kind of go back, push and pull back on one another, but they were designed to restore the other one. So when you're in dopamine mode, you're pretty far out of that serotonin regime. And when you're in serotonin regime and gratitude, you're actually restoring your ability to be outwardly focused. And so really gratitude it's a real power tool in terms of mindset and being able to navigate long duration or short duration effort. And I think it's vastly overlooked, and it's considered kind of loose and wishy-washy, but it's not. It's serious business.
And one last swing on this: the ancient Spartans and modern warriors, modern military as well, they have a humor practice in the middle of tough times, and that's more dopamine.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't know that, but I'm delighted to learn that, because dopamine is so powerful. I mean, we've felt it. Something I had a friend who was dying. He's dead now. He had a peaceful and good exit, despite the fact that we're sad that we lost him. And during his treatment, I mean, there were times where I was just like, it was so depressing. We'd sit there and chat. He was a colleague of mine, close colleague of mine. And then every once in a while he'd crack a joke, and he always had a really kind of dark sense of humor, and we'd laugh. And then I'd notice for the next hour or two, he was a different human being. And it wasn't just my experience. It was really, I could see something had shifted. Dopamine is so powerful, and it's not just when you cross the finish line. In fact, if I may, I just wanted, because your audience is so task driven, I just wanted to, there's a phenomenon called dopamine reward prediction error that if one can take advantage of, you can get a lot. And if you don't, it can be detrimental. The reward prediction error says that the amount of dopamine that you get en route to something is actually important compared to how much you get when you finally reach the goal. The best schedule you can have is little blips of dopamine to keep you on task, and then a big bolus of dopamine at the end, a big release of dopamine at the end. That reinforces the circuits for this long duration effort process and for figuring things out. It's not just about effort, it's about figuring things out in the mind as well. And the opposite is also true. If you have tons of dopamine and you're just cranking dopamine, and then you get to the meal or to the event or the finish line and it doesn't exceed that level, then what ends up happening is there's actually a kind of a depression circuit that gets activated. This may be at the root of things like postpartum depression of various kinds, not just pregnancy postpartum, but event postpartum. And so learning to tap into and kind of sense where your dopamine is at, how much you're in control of it, how much external things are in control of it, and what the sequencing is. is really important. So the goal is learn to control it and toggle it. Play with these things, because it's all essentially, in the end, it's all internal, right? No one's coming along and dripping dopamine in your head as you pass the water stand. It's all internal. You control the spigot.
No, but if you understand the science, which I'm definitely going to dive deep into everything you said and really make it part of my whole fabric and ethos and language, you could control, like you said, as you're talking, I'm thinking about long distance endurance events I did in the past. And when I was kind of depressed afterwards, well, it was because in one in particular, we got to the finish line as a team, and we were so slow, everybody was gone. There was nobody there. There was no pizza. There was nothing. And so I could have self-released a bunch of dopamine. We could have celebrated on our own, right? So you can control that. And if you know the science, you'll basically just kind of, create an exponential return on this whole experience if you do it right.
Yeah. And for young folks, of which I'm not, I'm 44, who are real young, like little kids, my hope is that in doing some public education about these things, because really I'm just translating science and putting it out there for people, that at that age, if they can learn to tap into this, they're going to have that for life. It comes on quick. For adults, there's tons of neuroplasticity in adulthood you can still access. You clearly arrived at a lot of these things independent of any of this knowledge. But if people would like to learn more, there's a wonderful book. I don't know the author personally. I did not write the book, although I wish I had. It's called The Molecule of More, which is all about dopamine and dopamine reward schedules in different contexts: addiction, relationships, physical effort. It's quite an impressive book. And I think that book and some other resources that are out there, if you just Google dopamine reward prediction area, you'll find a rich set of information that I think everybody could apply.
One last question. People are trapped in their homes, uncertainty, they've got that Molotov cocktail of things that are going wrong here, even though bullets aren't flying. What do you suggest? Yeah.
So stress mitigation is a big part of what my lab is focused on. We're running a study right now on respiration, and in particular, how particular patterns of breathing can be used to navigate this. So here's what I recommend. Morning light, just like I said before, avoid light in the middle of the night. It's not just about the content of what's coming through on those screens and the news reports. It's the light itself and the screens themselves. So we talked about that earlier, but I highly recommend that, because a lot of people are off their game right now in terms of scheduling. It's as bad as it's ever been. The other ones are, once a day, try and view a horizon, look at a distance. A lot of people are putting a lot of strain on their eyes by viewing screens all the time. It's not just about eye health. It's about the stress system and the ocular system are closely related. And all this viewing up close is, we're making ourselves claustrophobic. I actually take people into my lab. I put them in a virtual claustrophobia. They have the same airflow. I change only one thing, and that's their perceived distance to the walls around them. You give people a horizon or the ability to view at a distance for a couple minutes a day, it relaxes that. So even better, get into optic flow, self-generated optic flow. So walk, run, bike. You could do it driving, but it's best if it's through self-motion. And the optic flow actually resets some of these mechanisms. Believe it or not, optic flow and movement of the eyes suppresses the activity of a brain region we call the amygdala, which is the threat detection center in the brain. So, and there's now 4 excellent studies to support that. So those are the things I would do on a regular basis, just kind of housekeeping. The one thing that's really powerful for reducing levels of stress very fast is something that capitalizes on the fact that we have a set of neurons in our brainstem which are responsible for sighing. They actually reset the ratio of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the lungs and bloodstream. My lab's been looking at this. Other labs have looked at this. There's some excellent published data on this now. We all hear, take a deep breath. That's sort of the right way to approach getting calm, or do a long exhale. Sort of. The best way to quickly activate the calming reflex is 2 inhales through the nose with no exhale in between, and then a long exhale through the mouth. Repeat that maybe 2 or 3 times. That's the fastest way that I'm aware of to bring the nervous system from a state of heightened activation back down. And you can do this any time of day and all day if you want. So it's inhale, that second inhale, and then without the talking in between, of course. And it really is, it's capitalizing on a neural circuit. It's not just about lungs and air and being present and all that good stuff. It's really about the connection between the diaphragm and the brain, because that's the fastest way that the brain is aware of the status of the body, is through a nerve called the phrenic nerve, which communicates from the diaphragm back to the brain. So this double inhale, long exhale is a quick way of reducing stress. And then those other kind of housekeeping things, if you do those, and people are doing those on a regular basis, most days, I do believe they're going to feel a substantial shift in the positive direction.
So how do people get in touch with you?
I teach neuroscience on Instagram. It's Huberman Lab, Huberman Lab. And there I do a daily or semi-daily post about some topic in neuroscience, sometimes sleep, sometimes neuroplasticity, even topics like dementia and autism, and kind of try and keep people abreast of the latest and offer some tools that they may find of use in their own life as well.
I love it. I love it. This has been a wealth. I don't need to do another podcast ever. This is perfect.
Well, I'd be delighted to keep going, but I think I do think hopefully people have received some tools that they can put to use, and it's great that you already do all these practices. I've never done a Spartan race. I should try one. I like it.
We're gonna get you. An old a wrestling coach from Stanford is a buddy of mine, lives out by you. I'm gonna make it happen. We're gonna get you. We're gonna make you a Spartan yet.
All right, I feel like I just got that neurobiological car wash. I mean, this guy says everything that we believe in.
Yeah, so I'm visualizing in an automobile. You've got your tachometers in the dashboard, right? You've got your fuel gauge, you've got your battery gauge, you got your RPM gauge, and so for the human brain, you've got norepinephrine, you've got serotonin, you've got dopamine, and probably a lot of other chemicals in the brain. But those are the three we talked about. And if you screw up the norepinephrine, right, and you've got too much of it, I'm visualizing it as like a flame in your brain and body, and you could basically just burn out, flame out.
Yeah, you're using that hot stuff. Well, that stuff that burns hot and quick and fast.
You got adrenaline flowing. Yeah. You're going after it. You got the Persians in the distance.
Arrows flying in the air.
Arrows flying.
We're fighting in the shade.
2,500 years ago, and you're burning hot. And then somebody on the team turns to you and says, well, I guess today we'll fight in the shade. Laughter breaks out amongst the 300 Spartans. And what happens? A bunch of serotonin and maybe some dopamine gets released into the brain.
So their Spartans is like the secret weapon, like add some humor and laughter.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is we kind of know all this already. I just didn't know the biology behind it. And so
or the chemistry.
If I'm out on a giant run, let's just say hypothetically I'm out running 100 miles. Right. It's too much to think about. And so you got this norepinephrine cooking up in your body, you're getting hot, and one way to get through it, he was saying, which I agree with, I didn't know the biology here, was, you know what, I'm just going to make it to that tree. If I could just make it to that tree, and then you're giving yourself a little pat on the back, get a little squirt of dopamine. You know what, I'm going to pat myself on the back. I got 20 miles done. I'm pretty grateful. Hey, you know what, I see that person with one leg. I'm showing some gratitude. Get a little squirt of serotonin.
Yeah. Just
right?
I mean, if you think about it, when the chipmunk, right, he makes it to that bush, he goes, I didn't get eaten by the hawk. Boosh, serotonin. That little guy's doing great.
Well, another
gratitude.
Another interesting thing about that he said was you are getting little squirts of dopamine all along the way to the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And then when you cross the finish line, you get this big, overwhelming wave of dopamine.
Totally.
But you got to make sure that you embrace the little squirts along the way and then the big one.
Well, and that's what all these people have been saying. They're like, folks, if you accomplish a great task, the great task is a great task, but it's the 202,000, 100,000 miles that you did training to lead up to it. It's the 200 days. It's the 12 hours a day. It's like all of those little squirts that got you across that finish line. So the finish line is like the ribbon, heck yeah, but it's also like all the experiences and all that gratitude and all that dopamine and serotonin.
But knowing the biology and the science behind it actually helps.
Validates it.
Not only does it validate it, but it gets me conscious of utilizing the brain during those hard times. Again, like I just did it because I don't know why it made me feel good, right? But now you know the science behind it. Yeah. I'll accentuate those things.
Totally. And I think once again, it's like it reaffirms natural patterns. It's like, hey, you shouldn't have light in your face when it's dark out at night, like sunrise, like with going to dawn song is good for your health. Having optical flow, I mean, the fact that we as human beings have to have terms and words for like, you need fresh air in your face and to not be confined, it makes sense.
I think what Sefra is saying is it should not shock anyone
the
out there.
no-duh theory.
It should not shock anyone out there, especially those that tune in to Spartan Up, that at night when the sun goes down,
go to bed.
Yeah. When the
sun comes up, get up.
Like, get a little sunlight in the morning.
Yeah.
Right? Get a little sunlight in the morning. He said 5 or 10 minutes of sunlight.
Yeah.
Look out into the horizon. Again, not earth-shattering stuff.
Nope. But
now, I did like, because I did not learn this at university. I don't know if you did. 2 deep breaths in through the nose.
So
and then exhale just to relieve the stress. I kind of like that. And I got to be honest with you. I didn't know that napping was like a car wash for the brain. I did not know that.
Okay, so one thing that I can say about Joe is he does all of these things that are actually super in tune with the earth and like the right things to do without even knowing it, right?
I didn't even know.
Naps, okay, if you think about like a hummingbird, exert, gotta rest. But the thing about resting is when we live in a society where we're just infiltrated, just like with groundwater, you want to sink it, slow it, spread it. And you never allow time for knowledge to sink, slow, and spread if you don't take that rest. You can follow us at Spartan Up Podcast on Instagram or wherever you find your wonderful podcast. We're here each week, and we hope you guys watch us, but not after 7 p.m.?
Not after 7 p.m. and not before 5 a.m. Do not turn the lights on tonight. Get to bed. 2 deep breaths in through the nose, 1 long breath out, and take a nap.
Toodles!
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Honey Stinger, made with organic honey and delicious ingredients. Use the code HSSpartan2020 at honeystinger.com to save 30% off.